On today's podcast, we're going to discuss safety longevity, so stay tuned. Welcome to Warehouse Safety Tips. You can find the show notes to each episode, links to information mentioned on the podcast, the social media platforms we're on, and anything else related to the podcast at warehousesafetytips.com. Now, if you're a seasoned podcast listener, this podcast is going to be different from most you listen to. It's based around exactly what the name implies, warehouse safety tips. And since the people in this industry are busy, we know that time is money and each episode will be as short and to the point as possible. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get to the podcast. Over the last several weeks, I've discussed how talking about the coronavirus pandemic isn't an evergreen practice. If this is your first time listening, first of all, welcome. Second, if you're unaware of the term evergreen as it pertains to content, it's simply attempting to keep information timely no matter when it's seen. But as I've said and will continue to say, this situation is unlike anything we've ever experienced before, so until it ends, it still lends to content. I'm going to keep referencing it. The only other time in my lifetime that I can remember an entire nation being glued to the media and feeling so out of control was during the 9/11 attack in 2001. I bring it up because it caused a movement with a lot of Americans, and it was a renewed patriotism that we hadn't seen for a long time. Much like toilet paper and hand sanitizer during this pandemic, days after the 9/11 attack, you could not find a flag anywhere. Online or in stores, they were all sold out. People were showing their pride in America like never before. It was like the 4th of July on steroids everywhere you looked. Before moving on, here's a word from one of our sponsors. If you've ever been to or worked in a warehouse, you know just how important safety is to both management and staff. It's almost impossible to go 10 steps without seeing safety tape, angles, signs, and/or safety products. It's these items that show us how to be safe and avoid danger in the workplace. And if you're looking for the best products to make this happen, look no further than Mighty Line. Mighty Line floor signs and floor markings offer the best industrial products out there. We're proud to have Mighty Line as the official floor sign and floor marking company for the Warehouse Safety Tips podcast and site. Go to mightylinetape.com/safety tips to request a sample pack of their incredible safety signs and floor markings. Now back to the podcast. Before our commercial break, I was speaking about the overwhelming showing of patriotism after the 9/11 attack and how you could not buy flags anywhere. Just to let you know, I did have a point in telling that story. At the time of this podcast, we're just over a month into a stay-at-home order, and many businesses are still being partially or completely shut down. But it appears as if the country is going to start opening up again, and people are going to start resuming their day-to-day routines. Now, when that happens, it would be great and responsible if people would just continue all the hygiene and social distancing practices that they've been doing, but we all know that that's not going to happen. It's a lot like safety rules in general, and the reason for this podcast today. In past podcasts, we've covered what you do when nobody's looking, becoming quote-unquote blind or unaware of signs and safety markings after being exposed to them long enough, and just ignoring safety altogether. The reason that we covered them is just because people continue to do them. Remember those flags after 9/11? About 2 weeks after the attack occurred, I was walking to get our mail, and I saw something laying in the street. It wasn't being waved or displayed proudly as it had been the days before, but instead, this mini flag was just laying out forgotten in the street. I picked it up and immediately knew that things were going to start going back to normal, or more accurately, people were starting to forget. Safety can't have a shelf life. It has to be constantly reviewed and brought to the attention of staff to keep it fresh in their minds. And to all the safety professionals that listen to this podcast, it's going to be up to us to keep the importance front of mind. Otherwise, people will forget. So be sure to constantly stay safe and keep your flags waving. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Warehouse Safety Tips. If you visit warehousesafetytips.com, you'll find the show notes for this episode and access to all of our blog posts, previous podcasts, advertiser information, and much more. Thank you for listening to Warehouse Safety Tips, and have a safe day.